thanked me very much for bringing this conference to Greenock, so I guess that means some of you had a good time, and I think by the sight of some of your eyes, certainly that is the case. But in a serious point, actually, there's been a real economic boost to Inverclyde thanks to the amount of people that have put their trust in this conference to come here, so thank you very much. Just one technical announcement. As you'll be aware, you'll all have your NEC ballots. I know some people perhaps have had some IT difficulties, so if you go to the main desk at some point during the course of this morning, they'll be able to assist you vote out there, and the ballots will shut at 5 p.m. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, our conference chair.
Good morning, conference, and welcome to you all. So before we get started, we're going to watch a short video. Thank you.
Where once beneath a monarch's feet sat legislation's sovereign powers. That was Robert Burns on Scotland's capital city of Edinburgh. It was one of his poems in English, and in truth, not one of his best. But the poem was right about one thing. This was once the capital of a sovereign country. And although we got our parliament back 20 years ago, and that's a good thing, it was reconvened, it still ain't sovereign. So when I was First Minister, we built a bridge over the River Forth, a railway to the borders, we abolished tuition fees and introduced free prescriptions, and set Scotland on the road to a renewable revolution. These were all good things, but it's still another parliament, this one, on the banks of the Thames, which is sovereign and still calls the shots. That's why Scotland is now out of Europe. Poverty still stalks this land, and why nuclear weapons still contaminate the River Clyde. Indeed, Boris Johnson, as a Tory Prime Minister, has more power, more sovereignty over Scotland than our entire Parliament, and he intends to use it much to our detriment. We have the opportunity to propel Scotland towards independence. Alba has a role, has a significance, and that role will develop, grow, will bloom over the next few years. So Alba is rising.
And I'm sure, like me, we're all looking forward to hearing from our party leader this afternoon. But first, some really important notices, which start with the raffle. As you know, it's a pounder strip through there, and there's some lovely prizes, and that will be drawn just after the lunch break by our Deputy Leader, Kenny McCaskill. There's lots of stalls to go and visit. There's the iScot magazine stall, and that, as you know, is a multimedia current affairs and lifestyle publication packed with news and quality features, photographs and video about Scotland crafted for a global audience. There's a book stall there with lots of Alba members who are authors. There's a Scottish Sovereignty Research Group stall, the Scotland Jails Journalists stall, to our shame. There's the Story of St Andrew stall, and of course, our national flag, a white salt art on the blue background, as you see, our emblem itself, is recognised across the world as the symbol of Scotland. Now, in 2007, when Alex Salmond changed the name of the Scottish Executive to the Scottish Government, he made sure that the saltire was used as the symbol of our government. And it's one of the oldest flags in the world and traces its origins back to a battle near a village in Athelstaneford in East Lothian in 832 AD. So it's a lot of important symbolism there and a lot of information available at that stall. Now, there is a new fundraising initiative going on, and Alba Party members are getting early access to it. So please do visit that stall and the lovely Fraser Thompson, who you will find there. There's also the Women Won't Weesh stall and the Alba official merchandise stall. There's a baby pics stall, and that's quite interesting because none of you are getting them right, and I just don't know how it's so difficult, but we're going to have a bit of fun later when we give some of your suggestions as to who you thought the babies were. There's some leaflets at the back of the hall. Those who attended the local authority elections political information fringe yesterday, event yesterday, not everybody was able to take away a leaflet, so those who are interested in standing in the elections next May, please do pick up a leaflet from the back of the hall. They're available to you. That, of course, was run by Councillors Brian Topping, Lee Wilson, Maureen Bennison and Mike Mackenzie. And just two more wee reminders. If you need to leave the hall during speeches, please kindly do so as quietly as you possibly can so we can hear from our speakers. And the last thing, in case I don't remember, at 11:30 we're going to do a hashtag tweet of Alba21. So if you can tweet hashtag Alba21, that would be great. And I know you all know how to tweet because I looked at your tweets from yesterday. So those are all of the messages, and that allows us now to move to the substantive business and motion number 1 on nuclear weapons. The proposer of the motion has agreed to accept the amendment, so I'm going to ask the proposer, Councillor Lee Wilson, to move the motion with the amendment included, and that will be seconded by Al Harron. So welcome everyone to this important motion. Councillor Lee Wilson.
Conference, I'm in a particularly enviable position in that over the course of the party's future, and indeed even today, we will have much more controversial motions to debate. But I'm equally convinced that we're unlikely to debate anything quite as grave. Now, Alba, the People's Party, has a primary purpose, of course, independence for Scotland. And throughout every campaign before us, until that aim is realised, we will inject the urgency that that debate requires. But Alba has a blank canvas. Throughout this weekend, we have been debating a whole range of policy areas which are dear to us. None more so, I believe, than this one. And therefore, I must implore Conference to reject the immoral and illegal weapons of mass destruction based on the Clyde. For decades, we have been told that the terrors of the world would descend upon us if we were to rid ourselves of our nuclear deterrent, and only by homing nuclear submarines in the Clyde could we be sufficiently safe from the perils of evil. And the people of Scotland have, for years, thankfully, rejected such scaremongering. If our Nordic neighbours, Denmark, Finland, Norway, can all survive without them, then why on earth can't Scotland? But in addition to countering scaremongering from Westminster, we also need to hold the Scottish Government's feet to the fire over their commitments on Trident. Instead of negotiating a 3-year withdrawal from Scotland, which I have no doubt would then drag on interminably, the Alba Party would negotiate removal from day 1 of independence. Instead of 3 days, we would be looking at 3 weeks, in which timescale the expert advice tells us for each missile it is entirely possible to safely remove the weapons and dismantle their warheads. The decision to offer latitude on the timescale for withdrawal is entirely a political one, and one that Scotland undoubtedly need not take. For a moment, consider the political capital that Scotland would have after an independence vote. All the power would be in our hands. John Gower, a Rear Admiral at the time of the 2014 vote, concluded that independence would generate a fundamental and operational issue for the UK's nuclear deterrent. Why? Because there is no port available elsewhere for them to go in the UK. It is inconceivable that Scotland, holding all the power in that situation, should negotiate on the premise that we would hang on to nuclear weapons a little while longer while the UK government decides what to do with them. Why on earth would we do that? On the brink of not only abolishing nuclear weapons from Scotland, but, by default, abolishing them from the UK. Think of the message that would send to the world. Think of the soft power that Scotland could display. Think of the mark that Scotland could make as a global player, not by proliferating nuclear weapons, but by eradicating them. More than that, friends, we need to fully exploit our renewable future. Scotland provides 25% of Europe's wind energy, and as such, we should commit to building Europe's largest wind farm in Europe on that site. Let us build a green Scotland for the future, rather than kowtow to Cold War-era grandstanding. But Conference, Scotland requires the political direction going into any negotiations. We can either caw canny and haggle over Trident, treating nuclear deterrent as a record collection to be divided up between partners, or we can treat it for what it is: inhuman, immoral, and beyond any compromise. Conference, I may paraphrase someone here, and I hope he doesn't mind, but the rocks will melt with the sun before the Alba party uses nuclear weapons as a bargaining chip in any future independence negotiations. Conference, support the motion as amended. Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Al Harron to second the motion, after whom will speak Robert Reid with the remit back. Al Harron.
As you can tell, I'm also working on taking in the speakers' cards as well, so
Thank you.
thanks very much. No problem. It's like, I think a lot of people who were in other independence parties may have thought one day that they'd be up here speaking to their fellow nationalists. But I'm never prepared for it, because when it comes to a situation like this, and when it comes to a topic like this, the words are very difficult to come by, because I was born in the shadow of Polaris, and that's just across the river from the Holy Loch. And I grew up, just like Chris McElhinney did, just like anybody who was raised in Inverclyde, with the idea that should the terror finally come to a head, we wouldn't have time to say goodbye to our loved ones. We wouldn't have time to get to safety. All we could do is wake up and see a second sunrise. I've been a member of the international organisation May Peace Prevail on Earth. It was founded by Masahisa Goi, born in 1954 in Tokyo. He was a man from a large family and about 9 children in all. And he was a community worker for Japan, as it were, in the run-up to the war. And he was also a pacifist. He was an anti-war protester. And in Japan, that was not a good thing at the time. So he was 28 years old when Hiroshima was bombed. And ever since then, he dedicated his life to ensuring that what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki would never happen again. And retaining nuclear weapons on the River Clyde, not too far from the capital city of Scotland, is not on that order. So if conference will indulge me, I'll read a piece from Masahiko Goi's book, Living Like the Blue Sky, because I think it's very relevant for all of us. Why is it that humanity is divided into different nations and ethnic groups? It is because each group has its own mission. We can compare these missions to different colours. There is blue, there is yellow, there is red. The different colours blend together harmoniously and enhance each other, creating beautiful new colours. In the same way, different ethnic groups have their own missions, and as they accomplish these missions, they help each other and bring about great harmony in the earthly world. However, when human beings enter this physical world, we forget about these heavenly missions and instead begin to turn against one another. We become selfish, interested only in protecting our own country or group. If our colour, our mission, is blue or red or white, we only want to protect our own blue or red or white nation. When we have experienced this to the very limit, we finally realise that this can go on no longer. Masahisa Goi has passed away, but his legacy lives on. I attend the Allenton Peace Sanctuary celebrations, and one of the things that we do is that we work upon the mantra, may peace prevail on earth. And in Scottish Gaelic, that would be Gumari Shi Gever an Talamh. I hope I have pronounced that correctly. And it's It's with great sadness that I'm not making this speech at an SNP conference, but it is with great honour that I'm seconding this motion at the Alba party conference. I plead with you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Al. I'd now like to call Robert Reid to move the remit back, to be followed by Paul Donaldson, who will second the remit back. Robert.
Well, hello conference. This is my first ever conference, and hence the first time I've ever spoken at one. And I'd just like to give a little thanks to Christina Henry and Josh Robertson, who helped me with the procedure of setting up a speaking point today. You must think I'm a wee bit mad to choose to remit back such a popular motion in my first conference speech. But I'm doing so because I believe debate and different opinions are vital to any party. I'm sure, like me, it's one of the many reasons why you have all left the SNP. To make it clear, I think nuclear weapons are an abomination and an obscene waste of money, especially when we have poverty levels like we see today in the UK and Scotland. They are an archaic throwback to make people like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg feel like Britain is still a world power. However, I disagree with the wording of a specific part of this motion, as I believe it sets an unrealistic timetable for the removal of Trident and weakens Scotland's position at the negotiation table with the UK. Independence negotiations with the UK will be extremely difficult, and having the only place in the British Isles that can adequately store Trident is an extremely strong position of leverage over the UK government. This leverage will be vital in securing the best deal for our new nation. Trident could stay for a period of time after independence, at huge expense to the UK Treasury. I think setting our commitment to removal on day one would be leaving our negotiations hamstrung. By setting such a red line as day one of independence, it leaves little room to manoeuvre during negotiations. The position in 2014, one that Alex Salmond and many of us here supported, was that we would remove Trident at the earliest possible moment. What has changed? I believe that reflects the realpolitik of the situation we are in. We want this transfer of these weapons to be a safe one, and setting an arbitrary deadline like day one of independence, as brilliant as it may sound, I feel is an error. Just like a final comment, and it's a bit off topic, but I'd like to say I was too young to vote for independence and vote for the party under SNP under Alex Salmond. But I joined the SNP soon after his resignation because of the enthusiasm he had created within the movement. I'm sad that enthusiasm has now faded within the SNP, but I'm delighted now I've found a true political home in Alba where discussions, disagreement and debate are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to invite Paul Donaldson to second that remit back, to be followed by Murdo Ritchie, who will speak in favour of the motion. Paul.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Lee Wilson for moving this resolution. I sent an amendment in calling for the removal of Trident within 2 years of independence that I'd hoped would be on the agenda, but it's not. So instead I'm asking conference to remit this back. As a new party, we need to build up the trust of voters. If we make a promise, we need to be sure we can deliver it. As much as I'd like to see Trident to be completely gone on day one of independence, I'm not sure if this is achievable. Hopefully, after Scotland votes yes, the UK realises that keeping or renewing Trident would be an immoral and financially ruinous decision. Scottish CND have published a paper called Disarming Trident, which sets out a detailed plan to remove Trident within 2 years. The report can be found at www.banthebomb.org. To oversee the process, the Scottish Government would have to recruit, security clear and train a team of inspectors, which all takes time. The three main parts to Trident are the submarines, the missiles and the nuclear warheads. The plan would bring the submarines back to the Clyde and remove the keys and triggers, effectively putting the missiles and warheads beyond use within 2 weeks. The warheads and missiles
could then be moved into storage at Coolport, and then the empty submarines moved back to Faslane, or preferably moved out of the Clyde altogether. The longest phase in the plan would be the removal of nuclear warheads by road convoy from Coolport to the Burgfield Atomic Weapons Establishment in Berkshire. The report suggests one convoy per month, each carrying 8 or 9 nuclear warheads, meaning their complete removal from Scotland within 2 years. The timescale minimises safety risk and disruption resulting from more frequent convoys. When the final nuclear warhead has been removed, there should be a national holiday to celebrate Scotland becoming a nuclear weapons-free nation. The paper doesn't discuss timescales for removal of the empty submarines from Faslane. This would be negotiated with the UK along with any rental payments for temporarily using Faslane. It's the UK's decision to scrap them, build another base or move them abroad. There should be no suggestion of the submarines permanently staying in Scotland. The Greens recently claimed they could remove Trident using devolved powers. Like everything else from the Greens, this is pie in the sky. The only way to remove this abomination from Scotland is with independence. In my view, it's important to properly consult the local community on reuse of the land following the removal of Trident. A wind farm is one of the possible options that could be put before the community, but simply coming along and telling local people what's going to happen without consultation is not an approach that I think will go down well. Paragraph 3 talks about building Europe's largest wind farm at Coolport. The second largest wind farm in Europe is at Whiteley, and it covers a vast area of 55 square kilometres. The land at Coolport and Faslane covers a small fraction of this, so I would question whether building Europe's largest wind farm there is a realistic proposal. So please remit this motion back today, and let's come back next time with a more realistic policy and give the clear message that we'll never accept nuclear weapons in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now Murdo Ritchie to speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Marion Plunkett, who will also speak for the motion. Murdo.
Thank you. Thank you, fellow delegates. Timetables are technical things. What is required is the will and determination to remove nuclear weapons from Scotland as quickly as possible. Nuclear weapons are not just epitomised by events, they are a process, an eminence gris that lies in the background at all times. The biggest problem with the removal of nuclear weapons is not going to be simply just the removal. There are many nationalists do not imagine that Scotland can be partitioned in the way as happened in Ireland. And it may not happen in that way. But there are mechanisms through which partition can be projected. Such things as policies for a joint Royal Navy, legal immunity for NATO troops in the vicinity of Faslane, and so many other features that can undermine any operational or genuine form of independence. One of the biggest features that we have to also recognise is that even if a commitment and an abolition of removal of nuclear weapons from Faslane takes place, the continual membership of NATO still brings US and French nuclear submarines in to Scotland, as well as aircraft from the United States. I have not been a member of the Scottish National Party. I know the party of the SNP was to support NATO. I believe that Alba has to recognise that it is not a continuer of SNP policy. And the question of the continuation of NATO membership is made more problematic by NATO 23, 2030 and the recent summit, extending its boundary into the Indo-Pacific area where any perceived attack could potentially now trigger an Article 5 mobilisation within NATO. This has increased dramatically the possibility of nuclear conflict. It is sad that I know that a number of people have put in motions on the question of NATO. It will have to be discussed properly, and it will be essential if we are going to implement this policy properly. So I speak in favour of the motion, but with that qualification and the hope and aspiration that a much more fully rounded debate will also occur. Thank you, delegates.
Thank you very much indeed, Murdo. I now call Marion Plunkett to speak for the motion, to be followed by Councillor Jim McElhenny, who will speak against the Remit back. Marion Plunkett, welcome.
Thank you, Tasmania. Good morning, conference. I hope you'll indulge me for a moment as I read this to you. Can you hear the H-bomb thunder, echo like the crack of doom, while they rip your skies asunder, and fallout makes the earth a tomb? Do you want your homes to tumble, rise in smoke towards the sky? Will you let your cities crumble? Will you see your children die? That's from a song that my parents used to sing when I was a child. And I stand here today, I had no intention of speaking, but I feel that I have to on behalf of my parents, because I'm honoured to be the daughter of two of the original inhabitants of Astlane Peace Camp. When I was 4 years old, I lived on the side of a road in a tent where Navy personnel would drive past, throw cans of juice and cans of beer and chippies and anything else that they had at me as I played at the camp. And all my life, nuclear weapons have always played a massive part in the development of, I suppose, my political interests as well. So this motion is important to me because I live in the blast zone. I don't even get a 4-minute warning. The bomb falls, I'm gone. And I've lived with this notion all my life. Previous speakers have mentioned it. For me, there is no negotiation. Nuclear weapons must be removed from Scotland. And I firmly believe that the negotiations for that should begin on day one of our independence. It won't happen overnight. It's impractical to presume that it will, but it will happen. Why? Because it's what we, the people of Scotland, want. So I won't bore you terribly much with long drawn-out words. I've said what I've come to say, and I've spoke for my mum and dad, who've spent a lifetime campaigning to have these god-awful things removed. So thank you for your time today, and I ask you to support this motion and to have faith that our party and others who have a vested interest in this will negotiate the very best deal for us when that time comes. But never, ever should any one of us take our foot off the pedal in driving the initiative to have these weapons of mass destruction gone forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. I now call Councillor Jim McElhenny to speak against the Remit back, to be followed by our final speaker, Tommy Sheridan. Councillor Jim McElhenny.
I would like to say I'm a first-time speaker, but I can't. Good morning, conference. I wasn't intended to speak at this motion. However, I felt that due to my 41 years' experience working in the Ministry of Defence, 18 months of that time working at Whitehall, all the other times working at Coolport and Fastlane. I thought I might as well come up here and put my tuppence worth in. I started my career in 1976 at the age of 16. Didn't really know much about nuclear weapons that particular time. I took the job because it was the highest paid out of the 3 apprenticeships I was offered at that particular time. I could have been a TV engineer for £6.50, a gas fitter for £11, or I joined the MOD for £18.50. At 16 years of age, I thought, well, I'm going for the big money. Unaware, quite a sheltered upbringing, I suppose, what it really meant, what I was enjoying, joining a broad apprenticeship, and then at the age of 24, I was moved to a post as an electrical fitter, Polaris front end, where I processed, built and assembled and disassembled the re-entry bodies of the Polaris nuclear weapon system. From then, I've done a variety of jobs, maintenance, electrical maintenance, emergency safety systems, etc. Moving up through my career into management. Latterly, in 2017, when I retired, I was employed as a nuclear safety design engineer, which looked at to ensure that the facilities that we have, the nuclear facilities, that were safe to operate. All through that time, when it came to election times, my work colleagues would chastise me and saying, why are you voting for as it was then, until very recent, why are you voting for the SNP? You're voting yourself out of a job. I said, well, I vote for the SNP because it's not about me. It's not about my job. It's about my... It's about the future. It's about my kids' future. That's what I'm voting for. I don't care if I lose the job, if we get rid of nuclear weapons. I don't care. I'm looking at the future. So, as I said, throughout the years, I've always had that mantra, and it got to a stage that through my trade unionism representing members, I had to go in front of the Commodore with a member, and I had a yes badge on my lanyard, my security lanyard, and the Commodore said to me, why are you wearing that badge? And at that time I had a number of badges, so I went through the pantomime. I said, which badge are you talking about? My 50 pint blood donation badge, my Alzheimer's Scotland Friends badge. No, you know what badge? Oh, the yes badge. Why am I wearing the yes badge? I said, because I'm a yes man. You want me to do a job for you? I'm your man. No, why are you wearing that badge? I was like, oh, you think because I support independence that I'm anti-nuclear, I'm anti-Trident? See, if that's the case, I'd be a security risk. I shouldn't be here. And he quickly changed the subject. So getting to the subject, moving against the remit back, we can get rid of nuclear weapons from day one. There is no doubt about it. Negotiations will start leading up to whenever Independence Day is declared, and there's no way that we should have nuclear weapons as a bargaining chip. No way whatsoever. From day one of independence, we get rid, and it's up to them to get rid of the weapons of mass destruction. Support the motion and vote against the remit back.
Thank you, Jim. And now to our final speaker, Tommy Sheridan. Tommy.
Thanks very much, Tismina. Can I just say, brothers and sisters, that I think the debate has been great, and I really am anxious that we don't look for disagreement where it doesn't really exist. I've got to applaud both Robert and Paul for the way they've spoken today, and it's quite clearly that we're on the same side. We're clearly on the same side. We recognise that nuclear weapons are immoral, they're inhuman, and they're unacceptable here in Scotland. There is a disagreement. There is a disagreement over words and what the words actually mean. I would argue that this conference, this inaugural conference, is about laying down your principles, laying down what you believe in, laying down what is and isn't non-negotiable. There is details. Jim's just made a marvellous speech there. And there are details that have to be elaborated. We have to work and support the arms diversification policies that have been developed by the STUC and others. One of them that I read not that long ago suggested that we could afford to lay off all of those involved in nuclear weapons employment in Scotland and pay them £500,000 a year, and it would still be cheaper than keeping nuclear weapons. So we can work on the details. We can work on the details in relation to NATO and whether we support retaining membership of NATO. I share the brother's point about not wanting to be a member of that particular sullied and dirty club. But that isn't in the motion yet, because we're establishing our principles. And what is the principles of Alba? The principle is that no way nuclear weapons will be acceptable in an independent Scotland, not from year one, not from year two, but from day one. Day one. We say to the people of Scotland, and this is an important issue, brothers and sisters. You all know it. Some of you have signed the petitions like I have. Many of you have marched against nuclear weapons like I have. Many of you have been outside the nuclear base like I have. Some of you have been in jail like I have against nuclear weapons. We will continue to take those actions. Continue. And what we say in building the general support, not just for Alba, but for independence, to those people who say to you all the time, they did it in 2014, I don't like this person, I don't like that person, therefore I'm not voting for independence. We have to say, independence is not about people, it's not about a party. Independence is about our country and the future generations who live in our country. Independence. Independence, brothers and sisters. Independence to me is summed up. It's summed up in the placards that get brought, and I'm sure they'll be there next Sunday in Glasgow's George Square, as they always are at the Hope Over Fear rallies. I'm sure they'll be there. That placard that sums up all of our hopes and all of our visions, brothers and sisters. That placard that says, Burns, not bombs. That's what this party's all about. Burns, not bombs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Tommy, and thanks to all delegates for an excellent debate. We will now move to the vote. First, can I see cards raised for all those in favour of the remit back? Thank you, and all those against the remit back? Now can I see cards for all those in favour of motion 12, which is to remove weapons of mass destruction from day one of Scotland being re-established as an independent country? All those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. The motion is passed overwhelmingly. We now move to motion number 13, still staying with the subject of nuclear and nuclear energy, to be moved by Hamish Vernal. Hamish Vernal. While Hamish is making his way to the stage, I don't have a formal seconder cards in. Can I ask conference to give me a formal seconder from the audience, please? Thank you very much indeed. Hamish, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Conference. It's always bad to start with an apology, but actually I don't know very much about nuclear energy. The proposer didn't turn up, and so Chris said 10 minutes ago, would you propose this resolution? Fellow Alba delegates, MD know anything about nuclear energy? The resolution is in 3 parts, and I'm going to start at the end and work back to the beginning. To refuse any cooperation for the future expansion of nuclear energy in our country. I'm going to give you a personal view. I believe that nuclear-powered electricity is neither clean nor green. It's a contaminant in our land. I stand to be corrected by any scientist in the audience, but my understanding is that the nuclear rods, which are extremely potent, are in a liquid, could be water, and that becomes contaminated. How do we deal with this over time? Because time is really important in terms of the potency of that liquid and these rods. We're not talking in tens of years or even hundreds of years. For these potent nuclear rods, they have a half-life of thousands of years. That means they will decay in their potency over several thousand of years. They won't become out of that potency for several thousand years, up to 10,000 years. And what is our policy for dealing with this contaminant? Dig a hole and bury it. Aye, right. And that leads back to the second part of the resolution, which is the refusal now to take any more waste from other countries across the road. We've got a bad enough problem here in Scotland, and we're going to have to deal with it in some way. To take other people's waste from their country, I'm sorry, deal with it yourself. And that takes me back to the first part of the resolution and the cracks at Hunterston. We can only look at experience across the world where accidents have happened or human error has taken place. In recent years, look at what happened in the natural disaster in Japan at Fukushima. That has huge implications, not just for the people around Japan, but for people further across the world, and for our environment, the land and the sea beside it. And then at Chernobyl, the effects of that will be felt and continue to be felt for hundreds of years. Look at what's happening to the people born with fetal abnormalities, the cancers that come from the result of Chernobyl. We risk that at Hunterston, and we need to stop it, and we need to stop it now. Halt any expansion of the regulations. As I say, I don't know much about nuclear energy, and I stand to be corrected by people in the audience who know more about it. But please support this resolution. Nuclear-powered electricity is ultimately a contaminant in our land. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Hamish. The original proposer, Fiona Sinclair, couldn't be here this morning, so she has asked Denise Somerville, who will now second the motion on her behalf. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you, Taz. Thank you, Conference. I've been asked to speak on behalf of Fiona on this resolution. 30 years ago, I stood at the porch of Kesnock Bridge in Inverness, having been asked to be a part of a telephone tree organising a blockade of a shipment of nuclear waste going to Dunray. The only media articles of this event are incorrect in stating that 3 people took part in that blockade, because I can name 6, who were there, and there were a number of others who I didn't know. Our blockade made the evening TV news, and I took photographs and wrote an article for the Scots Independence. Although the shipment was being tracked, I do apologise, I'm really nervous, this is my first time. Although the shipment was being tracked by Greenpeace, they lost the track, and we only knew that it crossed the Scottish borders because of anti-nuclear activist and SNP member called Ian Thompson. Known as the Scottish anti-nuclear movement as the man with the van who spotted the shipment. Ian was stalwart and went to prison for his activism. I joined SNP in 1987 in the run-up to the general election. There were 2 things that helped me decide to commit to joining the party at this point. The reactor at Chernobyl exploded in 1986, and it remains, in spite of the ongoing catastrophe of Fukushima, the world's worst nuclear accident. The previous year, Willie McRae, a senior figure within the SNP, was found dead in mysterious circumstances. Given that his fellow anti-nuclear campaigner and English activist Halder Murrell was murdered in 1984. Willie McRae was a key figure in campaigning against plans to dispose of nuclear waste in Ayrshire. He represented the SNP's public inquiry where these plans were rejected, and McRae was credited with single-handedly preventing the area from becoming a nuclear waste dump. This was a major setback in plans to create the nuclear dump in Scotland. He was due to take part in the Dunray public inquiry prior to his death. In spite of all this history, anti-nuclear activists were told in the early 90s that at least part of the SNP leadership considered that nuclear power was not an issue. Indeed, the lack of support for the environment as a whole would have meant that had the Alba Party's proposal for a third of delegates to continue a quorum for conference had been applied to those events, the environment would never have been discussed at all. I set up an environmental group within the SNP, but this folded when I left in 2000. There was never any sense of urgency about the various environmental threats facing Scotland amongst the politicians, nor any real wish to understand the impacts of health of Scots, or even on the economic health. The contribution that such campaigning would have made to the case of independence was simply not even listened to. There is a wealth of information, if you seek to find it and read it, about the stupidity of nuclear energy. The upfront costs of the construction are enormous and are always escalating. The length of time it takes to plan and build nuclear power stations will mean that the new nuclear cannot possibly play any role in preventing climate change. The storage of waste are deeply problematic and have unlimited costs. The half-lives of various radioactive components of the waste will outlast by several orders of magnitude the length of the longest-lasting human civilization. Only the Finns have considered this. They are planning the nuclear storage using symbols, as are not counted in written language surviving the tens of hundreds of years in which these wastes will still be highly radioactive. In fact, the real cost financially, in terms of health, will be borne to you, not the corporations. It is extremely risky to keep old nuclear plants like Hunterston going well by their sell-by date, let alone to double the permitted number of reactor core tracks, as has happened. And that's even before you factor in the increased risk of storm surges for both old plants and new nuclear. So why would we have nuclear power in Scotland? Why would we spend billions of money on a dangerous technology when our country has such enormous potential for renewable energies of every kind and for large benefits and energy saving through retrofitting insulation to our housing stock? I cannot fathom why the Conference Committee passed the amendment that has been attached to this resolution. It is the only amendment selected that deletes part of the resolution, and it actually negates the whole thrust of the resolution. It would have been more honest to simply speak against it. Please pass the resolution, but not the amendment. Unless you do this, the Alba Party will have a policy on nuclear energy that is worse than the Green Party's or the SNP. Moreover, the amendment has given the Alba Party approval to devolve governments in Scotland to agree to the expansion of nuclear power in Scotland under the control of UK Government. If you are not ashamed of the prospect of that, you should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I now call David Harding to move the amendment, to be followed by Nick Jury, who I think is also seconding the amendment. David Harding.
Conference, I'd first like to thank you for this opportunity. I feel truly privileged to be here at Alba's inaugural conference, helping to shape our vision for Scotland. This weekend has rekindled the optimism and excitement I felt in 2014 as part of the Yes movement. Real issues are being debated, commitments to women, to democracy, to freedom of expression, to ending poverty, and the promise of removing the scourge of nuclear weapons from our nation are enshrined in policy that we can be proud to present to our fellow Scots. That is why I felt compelled to propose this amendment. It is imperative that we get our energy policies right. And while I wholeheartedly agree and endorse the first 2 points of the presented motion, I cannot, in good conscience, support a policy that will exclude from consideration a technology that has in the past 50 years prevented over 1.84 million air pollution-related deaths and the release of 74 gigatons of CO2 emissions that would have resulted from fossil fuel burning. We do not have the luxury of outright rejecting nuclear power if we are serious about preventing a climate change catastrophe. I'm not for one moment proposing we turn away from renewables. Scotland is in the fortunate position of being one of the few places in the world where wind turbine efficiency averages over 30%. And in 2020, the equivalent of 97.4% of Scotland's electricity generation was from renewables, predominantly wind. I'm sure many of you are asking yourselves, if we are already producing most of our energy from wind and hydro, why do we still need power plants? The simple answer is, it's not windy all the time, even when we take into account Boris Johnson's blustering. Scotland's electricity generation is part of the national grid. The UK-wide infrastructure that ensures whether you switch on a kettle at John O'Groats or Land's End, it will receive a 230-volt supply at 50 hertz. When Scotland has an excess of electricity production, it is sold to consumers in other parts of the UK, and fossil fuel generators south of the border can turn generation down. However, when it isn't windy, or when there is too much wind for turbines to operate safely, we become dependent on electricity transfers from England and Wales. 50% of electricity production across the UK is from oil and gas, 21% from nuclear, with only 24.5% being from renewables. Scotland cannot extricate ourselves from the national grid, nor would we want to, as the economic viability of our renewables sector is dependent on it. Let us be under no illusions. One way or another, Scotland will be dependent on nuclear power. Whether that generation occurs here or south of the border is irrelevant, and I have no problem with that, and neither should you. Why? Because nuclear power is amongst the cleanest, most efficient ways of generating electricity that exists. It is also one of the safest. What about Chernobyl, Fukushima, or 3 Mile Island? Undoubtedly, these were disasters and should not be taken lightly. But we do need to put things in context. The death count from Chernobyl currently stands at 60, Fukushima 1, and none from 3 Mile Island. The outrageous claim by Greenpeace that 200,000 people will die as a result of Chernobyl is frankly a disgusting lie. The International Atomic Energy Agency has placed the future total at 4,000. Still awful, but far less. This is in line with the findings of the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, from which I quote, "Apart from the dramatic increase in thyroid cancer incidence among those exposed at a young age, and some indication of an increased leukemia and cataract incidence among the workers, there is no clearly demonstrated increase in the incidence of solid cancers or leukemia due to radiation in the exposed populations. Neither is there any proof of other non-malignant disorders that are related to ionizing radiation. Any loss of life is tragic, but deaths associated with nuclear power pale in comparison to the 4.2 million that the World Health Organization estimates die annually due to ambient air pollution. Conference, we could spend all day debating the merits and flaws of nuclear energy. We could discuss how 70 years of nuclear generation in the United States has barely produced enough high-level waste to fill this hall, and that with reprocessing, 95% of it could be reused as fuel and the remainder chemically separated into materials with a half-life of only 500 years, as opposed to thousands. We could acknowledge the millions of lives saved annually thanks to the nuclear isotopes used medically that are a direct product of nuclear power. Or we could acknowledge that while nucleotides that result from nuclear power do take a long time to degrade, they will eventually. The elemental carcinogens like arsenic, cadmium and chromium that routinely blow from the ash lagoons at Longannet into the lungs of Fifers will be a blight on Scotland until the end of time. Instead, and in conclusion, Conference, I propose we pass this amendment, pass the motion, and leave every option on the table to address the disaster that is climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I call Nick Jury to second that amendment. Can I please kindly request, I know many people are speaking for the first time, there's a lot of speakers, and I really want to hear from you all. I know the delegates do. Please kindly keep your comments restricted to the standing order, which is 3 minutes. Thanks very much indeed.
Sure. So, Conference, I'm not instinctively pro-nuclear. In fact, I joined the SNP in 2011 because of the commitment to reindustrialisation through renewable energy. As David said, Scotland is uniquely blessed in terms of its renewable capacity. But there's something else to consider. With the last Scottish Government energy statement, 42% of our electrical generation came from nuclear energy. Now, as you've probably heard, internationally, looking at the globe, our house is burning down. Methane hydrates throughout the Arctic and Siberia are melting. They are many, many, many times more potent in terms of their greenhouse effect than CO2. We are approaching an event horizon in terms of our greenhouse gases and climate change. Frankly, we don't have the luxury of time, and we are in the fortunate position that we are exporting electricity. And yes, we have between 60 to 200 gigawatts of potential renewable energy, and yes, we must reindustrialise our country on that basis. Yes, absolutely. That's why I'm here today. That's why I get up in the morning to, this is what we're trying to achieve, a reindustrialised economy through renewable energy. But we have 42% of our electrical generation from nuclear energy. That's not carbon emissions. We owe it to the world as an oil-producing nation to try and do our bit to bring down that CO2. We don't have the luxury of time. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I now call Joan Kirk, who will speak against the amendment, to be followed by Sarah Sawyers, who will speak in favour of the motion. Joan Kirk, please, to be followed by Sarah Sawyers. Thank you. Is Joan in the hall? Oh, I beg your pardon. Thank you very much indeed. What's John? John. John.
Yep.
Apologies.
Sorry?
Apologies, I called you Joan.
Oh, well, I've changed my sex.
You're in the wrong party. Thanks very much.
This is all that I can really say. Well, I've been in engineering for the last 40 years. Recently retired. I've never been a member of a political party until there was the possibility of a supermajority to achieve independence immediately. So good morning, conference. I'm not used to this sort of speaking, so you need to bear with me. The premise seems to be that there aren't enough renewables currently to replace nuclear, that we need nuclear. A lot of this has come from very learned people. Going back to the 2008, 2015, there was a Dr. Mackay from Cambridge that produced a very useful paper, and I published the book that's available to anyone. And that analysed the amount of space, if you like, that could be transferred over to generating renewables. And it came out quite clearly saying that there wasn't enough space, so you really need nuclear. Otherwise, the whole energy policy for the UK doesn't work. There's been various reports, even going back to the justification for Torness. There was figures produced that over the lifetime of Torness, if a fraction of the money that it took, even in the development and analysis, far less the building of Torness, if that amount of money was used in energy reduction measures, simple things like insulation, using efficient light fittings, today's standard of electric motors rather than those that were produced 10 years ago. There's so many energy reduction methods that are available today, not in 15 or 20 years' time, when if you initiate a nuclear plant build today, it's not going to come online for another 10, 15 years. So in my view, the focus needs to be on renewables. The problem, as was highlighted earlier, is that renewables are variable. Wind, you've got no idea when the wind's going to blow. The sun, you've got no idea how sunny it's going to be tomorrow. As far as tidal's concerned, it's very predictable, so it's a great resource that needs to be developed more. And as far as the European Union's concerned, in Scottish waters, there's something like almost half of the potential generation for Europe is in Scottish waters. So interconnects to Europe are where we should be focusing our future energy policy. There will always be interconnects to England because they have, at certain times, excess power in the shape of nuclear that they can't get rid of. And if you look at the Westminster policy in recent years, they have, rather than taking the shortest route for interconnects to Europe, they seem to go down to Blyth and further south, and increasing. There's now the longest HVDC cable underwater going across to Norway, going down to England rather than taking the shorter route, which was almost 100 kilometres shorter. So why was that? Was it political, or was it from my background in engineering? It's cost benefits. So the future to me is that we need to invest now in redeploying the workforces that are in nuclear, both armaments and civil nuclear, and oil and gas. There needs to be actual investment in creation of jobs in areas that are going to benefit us in the long term. Now, the good thing about these aspects is you have, well, at the moment you've got lithium batteries. You know, Elon Musk installing batteries in Australia everywhere to level out power demand. Yep, almost there. 2 minutes.
No, you don't have 2 minutes. You've
Now,
got 2
2 minutes
seconds.
always extend, but you have to say that to begin with. The other aspect is there's new battery technologies.
We're at 5 minutes now, John. I just want to say lots of speakers, thank you. If you can just kindly wind up your marks, I'd really appreciate it. If you can kindly wind up your marks, I'd really appreciate it.
So the final thing is a lot of pressure on nuclear developments are to do with the SMR, or small modular reactors, being pushed by Rolls-Royce. Their testbed is in Hunterston, at what was called HMS Vulcan at Dounreay. That should
John,
always be removed.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Thank you. I now call Sarah Solius, who will speak for the motion. Sarah, you have 3 minutes. Thank you. To be followed by Andrew McKinnon to speak against the motion. Andrew will also have 3 minutes, and I'm going to be strict now. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, hello, conference. Right, I will rattle through this as fast as I possibly can. Let me begin with the amendment. As far as I can understand it, we've already voted against this amendment because we voted for bairns, not bombs, didn't we? Right. So I had the dubious privilege of working in the television industry for some years as an investigative reporter, producer, writer. And among the projects I undertook was a documentary about Dounreay and an explosion which took place in the waste shaft at Dounreay, which programme led eventually, or helped to lead, but was a significant point at which the end of Dounreay as a power production plant was written on the wall. What I discovered in the process was our nuclear industry, nuclear energy industry, is subsidised. The figures that make it look as if it is a profitable industry ignore the fact that the profits that keep it going are coming from the sale of its waste products. Those waste products, highly enriched uranium, depleted uranium, plutonium. In other words, without our nuclear energy, we have no nuclear arms industry. And I believe we just voted against the nuclear arms industry. Right. As for the clean, safe power that is generated, in 1966, there was an incident in a Dounreay reactor. Very shortly after that, a large amount of depleted uranium rods, and some of them actually highly enriched uranium rods, in fact, almost the exact equivalent of a nuclear core, were dumped into what had been designated a low-level waste shaft. That very close relationship between the rods from a nuclear core, which would have meant they had a runaway criticality very close to Chernobyl, which they got under control and hid by dumping it in that waste shaft, blew up. They dumped a ton of boronated glass on that, wasn't a core, of a reactor that they dumped in a low-level waste shaft in a cliff. And eventually, in 1978, I believe, for reasons that made absolutely no scientific sense, it exploded. And it jettisoned material all over the foreshore. I have the pictures. I made the documentary. It contaminated the entire site. Worse, it blew the waste shaft open. Today, the foreshore around Dounreay is so profoundly contaminated that SEPA says it can never be remediated. Thank you. This is our nice, safe, clean nuclear energy, my friends. It has completely destroyed and will go on destroying as the contents of this waste shaft come out onto the foreshore, the northern coast of Scotland, of Sutherland. We're not looking at Hunterston in America or Chernobyl in Russia. We're looking at Dounreay in Scotland and what it's already done to our country. And we're asking whether this is clean, safe energy. So, with my entire heart and soul, I beg this conference to pass the resolution and to reject this well-meaning but profoundly misinformed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. I now call Andrew McKinnon, who will speak against the motion, to be followed by Ian Chisholm, who will speak in favour of the motion. And I'll see if I can take any more speakers after that.
Good morning,
Andrew.
Conference. Can I just say how excellent it is to be here in a room full of independent supporters. Now, we've just heard that the proposition don't know much about nuclear energy. I'd have to agree. We're being told the reactor core at Hunterston. Well, there's 2 reactors at Hunterston. The motion talks about any other power plants in Scotland. A rudimentary Google search would reveal that the other is Torness. Why is it not featured in this motion? Conference, it's because it's poorly researched. And given that we can't even identify how many reactor cores there are at Hunterston, I'd like to suggest that the Office for Nuclear Regulation is better placed than this delegation to decide on the safety features of that power plant. Let's talk about the environment. The IPCC released their AR6 report earlier on this year, and they identified 4 channels under which we can get to carbon neutrality by 2050. Every single one of these requires the expansion of nuclear power, not the abolition of it. How selfish would we have to be as a nation, a developed nation, to turn our backs on this energy resource that produces as little carbon as wind and tell the rest of the world, you can deal with the problem. This is all of our problems to solve. Now, I'm going to wrap this up and not take too much more time. We've got a choice here, Conference. Alba can be the 3rd pro-independence party that follows the happy-clappy, anti-scientific view of the Green Party against the IPCC, or Alba can rise and lead the way on climate change in the independence movement. That's all I've got to say. Please either vote for the amendment or against the motion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew. I now call Ian Chisholm to speak for the motion, to be followed by Charles Connolly, who will speak for the motion. Ian Chisholm.
Thanks, Convener. Ian Chisholm from Edinburgh, Lacu, and I'm here to support the amendment and the amended motion. These steps, I might say, are a bit of a challenge when you're 76. However,
sorry to interrupt. Just so I'm clear,
you're
speaking for the amendment.
And the motion, the amended motion.
The amendment hasn't been accepted yet.
The amendment, then.
You're going to speak to the amendment. I'll have your permission to change your card, then. I just want to be clear so delegates know what they're doing. Thank you very much indeed. You're speaking for the amendment.
For the amendment.
Thank you, Ian.
Okay, so listen, the amendment seeks to reinforce or keep open the possibility of future developments in nuclear energy. I mean, we must not chuck out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, I'm totally opposed to the fissile type of nuclear energy we currently have. In fact, I go back a long way in that, and at 76, I don't know how many folk here remember another party who's fallen by the wayside a wee bit on this issue. We marched to Milwaukee in the Galloway Hills against the NIREX proposal to dump waste in Scotland. That was a terrible thing. And just for my benefit, is there anybody here who walked at Milwaukee against dumping of fissile material? I don't see anybody, so that makes me feel very, very old. Anyway, the whole issue of the nuclear power generation is changing. And I know it's been said for years that fusion is the bright, shining hope of the future of nuclear energy. Well, it's getting closer. The Tokamak plant in France is now close to producing more electricity than it consumes to start the ignition. Similarly, there's a laser plant in America which is almost up and running and producing energy. So these technologies don't produce huge amounts of radioactive material which has to be buried for generations, thousands of years sometimes, which I'm totally opposed to. But the amendment asks to keep an open mind on future nuclear power because there are technologies like thorium-based nuclear energy which has been developed a lot in China. And we do want China to stop producing electricity by coal and increasing climate change, CO2. So that's a great thing that China's going towards a thorium-based nuclear power. It's the lesser of two evils, if you want. Now, it's still a fissile process, but again, if you use thorium, it's a lot less of a problem for long-term storage than plutonium or uranium-based nuclear energy. I mean, going right back, the fact is that uranium was only ever used as a means of producing nuclear weapons. That's what its primary purpose was. But we want to get away. Yes, I will, thanks. So I'll leave you with this, folks. Vote for the amendment to the resolution. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. I now call Charles Connolly, who will speak for the motion, and Charles will be our final speaker. Charles Connolly, and apologies to those who are disappointed, but some of our speakers ran on. I'll have to be much more strict in the upcoming motions. Charles Connolly, thank you very much.
Morning, Conference. Thanks for giving me a bit of time to speak this morning. Over this weekend, we've been setting out a way forward for this party to go in the future. And what we're doing here this weekend is setting out policies. We're setting out not policies, but values. These policies that we'll get in the future will be based on. But these policies that we're setting in the future, that we'll decide at future conferences and future committees, and we'll use them as guidelines in the future for the policies that we're setting out. Yesterday, we laid down a set of values that states that we will accept all people as equal, no matter their sex, their gender, their colour or their creed, and we will endeavour to create a country that is safe and welcoming to all. A cleaner, better and more equal country in which we live, and by putting in place mechanisms to harness the natural resources that we have. Earlier we voted to put in place procedures to ensure the removal of Trident as of day one, and that's the way it should be. By doing that, we have become the only unilateralist political party in Scotland, and that's something that we should be proud of. What we don't want to do now is go spoiling and undermining that value that we've put in place by supporting an amendment that sets up us as a party of nuclear power, because that's exactly what we've all become. You can change policies, and we will do that, from one conference to another, but we can't change values, and what we're setting today is a value. So don't let people kid you on that nuclear is clean. It's not clean. We look back at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl and Fukushima. They were being mentioned earlier on today by others. We wouldn't want to go there and live. And Scotland cannot afford a Fukushima. We really can't. They might be clean nuclear power stations for this generation and a generation to come, but at some point somebody's going to have to clean up that mess. We can't leave that to others that are not here yet. We've got to lead the way and give them something that we can be proud to hand on to them. Just like we're going to have with Hunterston, when we become independent, that's going to be our issue. We're going to have to clean up that mess. Don't create a mess for somebody else that has to clean up at the back is. Okay, thanks. People say it's good for jobs. If that's the case, then why did we vote to get rid of Trident? That's good for jobs. We cannot base it on being good for one and not good for another. So set our values, move on, and get the policies in place for the future. Support the motion and reject the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to all speakers for an excellent debate, and apologies to those who I couldn't call. We'll now move to a vote. We will vote first of all, delegates, this is motion number 13. We'll vote first of all on the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment, please raise their cards. All those against? Thank you. That's overwhelmingly the amendment falls. We are now voting, therefore, in favour of the motion. Those in favour? All those against? The motion passes overwhelmingly. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, delegates. We now move to motion number 14 on the future of Scotland's ferries, to be moved by Mike Mackenzie and seconded by Ian Chisholm. Mike Mackenzie. And welcome Mike, who of course was yesterday duly elected as our national government convener.
Thank you, Tasmina. Conference.
I'm just going to, sorry Mike, can I just ask if delegates could leave as just quietly as possible? Thank you very much indeed, delegates. Sorry Mike.
Conference. There was a time when the sight of a Calmac ferry in its black, white and red livery made an islander's heart lift, filled that heart with hope, and filled that heart with pride. Not now. Now the sight only brings a sorry sadness. Now the sight makes you shake your head. Now the sight suggests despair. As Scotland's islands are on their economic knees, struggling to recover from COVID, they're dealt a hammer blow by the chaos ranging across the whole ferry network. A chaos that's persisted now unabated for months. Not a day passes, but another ferry breaks down. Not a day passes, but the ongoing disruption deepens. Calmac's directors should hang their heads in shame. CMAL's directors should hang their heads in shame. Transport Scotland's officials should hang their heads in shame. And the Scottish Government should hang its head in shame. A Scottish Government that's turned its back on Scotland's island communities. A Scottish Government that's got no apology to make to businesses that are hanging by their fingertips. And a Scottish Government that's got no credible plan for improvement, nothing to say, and no solution in sight for this massive and ongoing disruption. Delegates, self-evidently, the ferry system is not working. Self-evidently, significant change is required. We can no longer afford the inefficiency of 3 separate silos running our ferry system. We can no longer afford the inefficiency of 3 separate sets of empire building, of 3 sets of buck passing. We need one organisation to deliver our ferry system and services. And we need to put to bed any notion that Scotland's public services can't be run effectively and efficiently. We need to put to bed the ludicrous notion that here on the Clyde we can't build ships. For only a generation ago, we built the best ships in the world. Conference, the tide is falling for the SNP Scottish Government, just as the tide is rising for Alba. Because we in Alba have the ideas and the commitment and the will to build a better Scotland, a better future for every part of Scotland, an independent Scotland. I'm pleased to move this motion and ask you to support it.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. I now call Ian Chisholm to second that motion, to be followed by Councillor Jim McElhenney to move the amendment. Ian Chisholm, welcome back.
Thanks, Conference. I'm here to support Mike's very pertinent motion, and my only criticism is it doesn't seem to go far enough. The whole maritime issue in Scotland needs a whole day debate or some sort of committee to promote all the good things that...
Ian, thank you very much. Ian, if I can ask you to stand on the big black cross.
Got you.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you want me to start again? No. Right. So my problem is that the motion doesn't go far enough. But I back the motion and Mike's support for it because it's long been needed. We need a whole day's debate on the whole maritime issue and the wider issues arising from our maritime heritage, which we seem to have lost a bit. You know, the other issues are about the type of ships that we need to serve the islands and things like that. But we do need some sort of comprehensive policy. Myself, I spent my youth probably misspent at sea, travelling around the world as a radio officer. So when I left the sea, I started my own business in marine electronics. And for 40 years, I worked around the yards that are no longer there now. And you've no idea how emotional that was for me to come along the dockside there at Port Glasgow in Greenock and see Lithgow's, a yard which built huge ships and huge expertise, is now a McDonald's bar, which signifies as a metaphor for the whole industrial decline in Scotland at the moment. But Alba's here and a new Scotland is rising, and hopefully we can get these industries back again. This is a huge resource in skills that we have in Scotland. Now, many of the skills are gone now because the people and the engineers are gone, but there's still old wrinklies like me around that do have the expertise that needs to be passed on to the younger generation. I know that another party, which I'll not mention, never used the expertise in Scotland, and I hope that Alba can. And remember, it's free. We don't have to pay £3,000 a day for a consultant. Yep. So, lots of things to say, but really, I'll give the floor to the next speaker and hope that you can support the resolution as it is. Thank you very much, Conference.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. I now call Councillor Jim McElhinney to move the amendment. Can I have a seconder to the amendment from the floor, please, so the amendment can be heard? Thank you very much indeed. Councillor McElhinney, welcome back.
Firstly, thanks to Mike for bringing this important motion before us, and for Ian for his words as well. Both were excellent speakers. I wholeheartedly support all of the content of this motion. Turning to the amendment, I have supported the aims of the campaign to save Inchgreen Dry Dock Group since they were formed. They're from all parties and none. Indeed, one of our delegates today, Isabel DeLucy, is a prominent member. Isabel, you here today? No, identify herself. Oh, she's up in the balcony. Welcome, Isabel. The campaign has helped to put a spotlight on the Inchgreen Dry Dock, ensuring that it is politically unacceptable for it to be allowed to continue to be mothballed as an asset, when it should be in fact be the key maritime asset in the west of Scotland, and indeed a key asset in Scotland's industrial strategy to re-industrialise the Clyde, creating thousands of jobs through direct employment, but also through local supply chains. The dry dock and most of our waterfront assets and estate was handed over to a private company, Peel Ports, in a 125-year lease arrangement for £1 a year. That waterfront was hundreds of years in the making, and in centuries gone by wealthy businessmen through philanthropy helped pay for key parts of it. For it to be handed away to a private company for £1, for them to then go on to make millions upon millions of private profits from it, profit that could have been invested in Inverclyde's public services and for the common good, is still a scandal to this day. This is a political scandal of which the surface has never been truly scratched. The deal, which was struck by Inverclyde Council back in 2008, should have been subject to a public inquiry. Since that time, with much government financial assistance, Peel has developed most of the waterfront. However, the dry dock has had little or no investment. It's been left to deteriorate. So many years of neglect and indeed destruction. The Scottish Government now has the opportunity to directly award every single new CalMac and Northern Ferry to Ferguson's. Whereas at the moment there is a real risk that orders may be sent to Camel Laird and the Mersey to construct the new Gourock Dunoon and Islay ferries. Instead, we can guarantee 2 decades of work to Ferguson's. The scope of this work would be a foundation for the yard to expand and win contracts for large ocean-faring vessels, as well as major renewable projects. This is why bringing Inchgreen into public ownership is crucial, as it will be vital in growing the workforce to in excess to 1,000 quality and well-paid jobs, with a pipeline of apprenticeships created each year to support the growth and retain our skills base. I'm therefore asking you to support the amendment to add to the additional paragraph to bring Inchgreen Dry Dock back into public ownership and part of the Ferry Scotland umbrella. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim. We'll now vote. This is motion number 14 on ferries. All those in favour of the amendment, please raise their cards. All those against? The amendment passes overwhelmingly. Can we now vote on the motion as amended? All those in favour? All those against? Unanimous it is. Thank you very much indeed. Now, before we move on to motion number 15, can I just remind you all of my little request for you all to tweet #Alba21 so we can get it trending, and more importantly so because we're going to hear from our next excellent speaker. I'm delighted to confirm that last night the Alba Party Westminster Group held its AGM, at which Neil Hanvey MP was elected Alba Party Group Leader. And with that, I'd like you to welcome to the stage to propose the motion on Scotland's recovery from COVID-19. Neil Hanvey MP. Delegates, with your acceptance, I've allowed Neil extra time so you can deliver a Westminster report at the same time. Thank you very much indeed.
Hi, Conference. I hope you're having as much fun as I am. It's been a really fantastic first conference, and it's a great honour for me to be elected the Westminster Group Leader. We might be a small group, but I think our impact is certainly being felt. I'm not going to go on too long, but I just want to make some comments about Westminster and our ambitions as a group for the future. The first thing I'd like to say is when I was a wee boy, I was really fascinated by nodding dogs in the back shelf of cars in front of us, and it didn't really matter what their position was. It didn't really matter how the car moved around. Their agreement or dissent was dictated by the actions of the driver and the road that they were travelling on. There was no need to think, they just had to nod along. And that was a fine amusement as a child, but surely we should expect something more from our politicians rather than to just nod along to whatever diktat is issued from on high. Well, I certainly expect more from politicians that I've elected, and I have tried to embody that principle in my own practice as a politician. However, holding and expressing opinion in these days, these post-truth days, is not without risk. And I certainly know better than many about the significant personal cost that speaking frankly can bring. Regardless of how out of fashion opinions may be and however unpleasant the punishment for expressing them, I would never trade places with those who remain silent for anything. What is the point of politics when debating the exchange of ideas and arguments is frowned upon? I didn't go to Westminster to play the Westminster game. I didn't go to Westminster to dance to Jacob Rees-Mogg's tune. And I did not go to Westminster to talk about Westminster's policy areas and how to play that game. And when I joined the SNP group in Westminster, I asked a very straightforward question, one that I thought would have been of interest, and that was, when do we start talking about independence? The response I received, although it was in a Zoom meeting, I have to say, was as if I'd let off a stink bomb in the room. The shrinking of noses and the disdain that I picked up from that simple question really concerned me, and it paved the way for the next few weeks and months. And I think since the formation of Alba, we may be small in numbers, but I think our presence in Westminster is definitely now being felt. Whether that is my continued work on COVID, or indeed Kenny's outstanding work on the Lord Advocate role in Scotland, and being able to secure agreement from Westminster that they will give permission to the Scottish Government, should they ask, to open the Scotland Act up so that that role can be reformed in a way that plays to a stronger hand to Scotland's justice system. The tepid response, however, from the Scottish Government and the programme for government in recent discussions was that they will look at the role. And that is all. Now, we all know that we've given voice to concerns about people who have suffered injustice, such as Craig Money, Mark Hurst, and there are others that you'll be aware of, that other injustices that are sub judice, so I won't mention them. But we will continue to lead on the inadequate management of such policy areas, both at Westminster and at the Scottish Government. But we will face resistance at every turn. But as a group, I can give you a commitment that we will plan to always highlight the importance of independence. We will be unafraid and robust, and as the Westminster Group leader, I will ensure that all those efforts will be underpinned by the case for independence and the liberation of Scotland and our people. So, thanks for that indulgence in the new job, but I want to move on to a very serious challenge for our generation and in generations, and that's our recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, before I do that, I think this is a very serious issue, but before we do that, can you join me in giving thanks to the extraordinary efforts of all of our healthcare and scientific workers and all of the key workers across our country, many of them on minimum and low wages, who have kept the supermarket shelves stacked, who have kept our council services running, and who kept the lights on through the most recent dark months. The challenge remains very real and serious. The most recent figures, 4,298 new cases of COVID have been reported. That's 10% of the number tested. 10 reported new deaths have been recorded. 83 people are in intensive care, and almost 1,000 people were in hospital yesterday with recently confirmed COVID-19. Now, the vaccination programme has been really successful, but the vaccination programme is only one part of managing infection. This has been my job for most of my life, particularly working in cancer care and bone marrow transplantation. The management of infection is a core part of the job. It underpins everything that you do, and it's not hard. There are three strands. There's the vaccination or treatment sections, the pharmaceutical interventions. There's the non-pharmaceutical interventions, so masks and gloves and all of that kind of stuff. As we would understand it during the pandemic, social distancing and masks and good hand hygiene. And then there's another fundamental part, and that's surveillance and understanding how the infection is behaving, and whether that is in a single individual in a room or in a population. All of those three components are absolutely essential. And what we have found is in this pandemic, the Westminster Government have focused solely on vaccination to the expense of surveillance. So they don't really understand what they're dealing with. And in my worldview, that's guesswork. And guesswork is just not good enough. And the only successful deviation that the Scottish Government have embarked upon has been a different style of messaging. And whilst that did pay dividends, and I think it has to be recognised that it did pay dividends in the early days of the pandemic, where we find ourselves now is under this euphemism of a four-nation approach to the pandemic. Let's just call it what it is, a UK-dictated approach to managing the pandemic. Last summer, when I was still on the Select Committee in London, we spoke about surveillance and spoke to Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer in England. And when the lateral flow devices first came online, I read quite a lot of the data about them in the BMJ and raised concerns with the Deputy Medical Officer at that time. And it was very clear from almost the beginning that these devices were being used for a purpose that they were simply not intended for. They were not intended for asymptomatic use. And we now know, after the government's own testing, that they only identify infective people in 40% of the cases. So we know that they're not really that great. But I tried to raise this repeatedly with the Scottish Government. I tried to raise it with the SPADs in the health team, and a reply from them came none. It's simply not good enough. There have been opportunities, whether it's vaccination of 12 to 15-year-olds to break the spread of the virus that seeds in young people, spreads around schools, and then infects up through the different demographics, to the gimmickry, and let's call it what it is, the gimmickry of vaccine passports. Vaccine passports do have a role to play, but they're not a solution, just as vaccination on its own is not a solution. There's been a shortage and near collapse in PCR testing in Scotland, and that was picked up by the BBC, but then not reported. These are really fundamental concerns about how we deal with the COVID crisis. My position on this has always been pretty clear. Scotland had an opportunity right from the beginning to chart an independent response to this pandemic, to take bold decisions, to even close the border if necessary, to protect the Scottish people. Through that, we could have shown greater confidence, and the Scottish Government have missed the trick. We have called in this motion for the Scottish Government to immediately seek the transfer of the full powers of COVID recovery for the Scottish Government to lift our people from the grip of this pandemic. But independence is absolutely essential. It can't wait. It can't wait for ever more pernicious and restrictive policies to be enacted to control and silence our cause. But that will never happen. We will never be silent. And let me say this in asking you to support this resolution. We can emerge from this pandemic more confident, stronger and independent. So please support the resolution.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil. I now call Kenny McCaskill to second the motion.
I'm going to be very brief because I think my colleague and group leader Neil has expressed far more eloquently than I can. I had 2 bites at the cherry yesterday and I'll be having a few minutes as we introduce the leader's speech later. All I can say is to repeat what I said yesterday. Scotland has the opportunity to do so much better. The contrast in terms of performance by the First Minister with regard to Boris Johnson is clear. The difficulty is that how you perform in terms of dealing with the media and indeed expressing matters verbally isn't necessarily the same in terms of ability on the ground. And as Neil correctly said, steps that could and should have been taken to ensure that Scotland was better protected were passed up. When it comes to recovery, that cannot be allowed to happen. We have to ensure there is going to be a cost that has to be borne for the payments that have been made. We have, as I say, had seen the Chancellor bail out money, and it's happened all across. All the criticisms made of Corbyn have actually been shown to be rather false. But there does have to be a reckoning. The tragedy is that under this UK government, it is going to be enforced austerity, further impoverishment of the poor, starting with the universal credit uplift being taken away. Rather than investing in industry, rather than maintaining standards of living, rather than making sure that those who have the broadest shoulders, those who have the greatest assets and wealth pay, they're going to ensure that once again it's the poor that have to build while those who have actually made money. Because let's also remember, some people have done remarkably well during COVID. Not simply individuals with investments. Investments that don't pay tax, that are either lying bank accounts out with or are dealt with by accountants to ensure that they don't pay, or indeed corporations who have boomed as a result of a change in how purchases are made, who we historically know don't seem to have an interest in paying corporation tax, let alone paying living wages to their employees. Let's make sure that the recovery is about investing in a new Scotland, and indeed that it's paid for by those who have the broadest shoulders, not enforce poverty upon the poorest.
Thank you very much indeed, Kenny McCaskill. I'd now like to call Judith Reid to move the remit back, to be seconded by David Younger, who will second the remit back. Judith? And then, Neil, I will ask you to sum up very briefly. Thank you very much. Judith.
Just give me a second. Get the specs on. First of all, I'd like to say there's absolutely nothing that I can see or hear what Kenny or indeed Neil said today. However, there is one point within the resolution that I would like to bring to your attention. I'm not someone who has ever been comfortable on stage, nor someone who would ever be at ease in front of a camera. However, today I feel compelled to stand before you all at conference and be the voice for hundreds of thousands of people within the UK and tell you a wee bit more about long COVID. Give you an insight through a lived experience perspective. Now, I will warn you, I may get emotional. For me to admit publicly how much COVID has personally affected me is not easy. From someone who was, as my nearest and dearest described me, as never off the head of the road, 22,000 steps a day kind of girl, to not managing a stairs to go to bed, I ended up installing a fridge, microwave, crockery and utensils into my bedroom to save me from going downstairs. There are a few folk in this room that I will be eternally grateful for, to have them in my life, because without them, I would not be standing before you today. They called, they messaged, they FaceTimed me daily, hourly on these really bad days, which often led them to staying overnight. They brought me fresh food, mowed my grass, took my dog out for a walk, came with me to hospital appointments because I was not well enough to drive. And still, 18 months on, they continue to do all of the above. And you all know who you are. I also thank them for not commenting on my appearance. COVID hair was when I was too exhausted after showering to actually put a brush through it or turn a hairdryer on. Me having to choose when to walk the dog and shower, because doing both was, and often still remain to be, exhausting. Taking that call in the middle of the night when too terrified to go to sleep in case I didn't waken up. That is the reality of COVID. I consider myself to be very lucky. Some folk don't have that network of great friends, family and neighbours. Some don't live in areas where 5 minutes and you're in a green space and fresh air. Some don't have doctors and medical professionals who recognise or validate long COVID. I had pneumonia for 38 weeks. I admit I was totally ignorant to just how painful and debilitating it is. Unless many of these symptoms affect you directly, you just don't realise the impact. You never know what is going on with the person sitting right next to you. You become invisible, unheard, written off. You are dehumanised, disenfranchised and disregarded by a society and systems our governments put in place. This must change. To make myself vulnerable and tell what everyday struggles COVID and long COVID has burdened on hundreds of thousands of people, myself included, needs to be heard. Conference. As many as 110,000 Scots are thought to have long COVID, including our children. Long COVID can leave individuals struggling with daily life, noting that no two people's symptoms are the same. Our Scottish Government does not have specialised COVID clinics or centres. Many are operating in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. The UK Government committing £34 million for their COVID clinic centres and their rollout. The Scottish Government instead has chosen to invest significant sums of money into understanding long COVID. Scotland's statistics now show that 1.9% of the Scottish population are thought to be suffering from long COVID. Researchers expect many more to be diagnosed in the future. The reality is COVID-related deaths in Scotland are now 8,242. In an independent Scotland, would our government have acted differently? Would or should have the First Minister closed our borders? I would urge the conference, please remove the so-called in paragraph 8, where long COVID is real, long COVID is tough, and long COVID is here to stay for those who have it, who will remain to have it, and those who will undoubtedly get it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Judith. Thank you, Conference. It just didn't seem appropriate to interrupt Judith earlier on in her speech. I hope you will forgive me for allowing her to carry on to 5 minutes. But I will request David Younger, who will support the remit, back. Second it, if you can kindly restrict your comments to help us get through the agenda. David Younger, thank you very much indeed. Could you manage 2 minutes for us, David? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I fully endorse Kenny and Neil's proposal of this, and I want to underline the situation with long COVID. And I want to do it in a very specific way. In 1988, I contracted viral pneumonia. This was a disease which was not called COVID. Nobody knew what COVID was. I spent 3 months in hospital. I spent a further 9 months trying to recover, and I suffered the consequences for a further 5 years. Now, in all that time, myself and a group of other people tried desperately hard to get the NHS to take it seriously. When we visited our GPs, we were dismissed. We were told, no, it's not happening to you. You're just a bit tired. Just go home, rest. I lost my business. I lost a lot of friends during that process. And I have to say that I fully support this I don't know if you call it amendment or oh, the remit that's been just presented to you, because quite clearly there is a problem with the after effects of COVID, and this problem is not being taken as seriously as it needs to be taken by the Scottish Government, and I'm really not clear what the UK Government thinks they're doing. And I don't actually care, because all of the powers to do this should be in Scotland, and they should be exercised by a responsible Scottish Government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, and for your generous brevity. The conference is grateful to you. Can I ask Neil to do a very brief summing up, please, so we can hear the next motion? Neil Hanvey, please.
Thanks, Conference, and thanks, Judith, for your words. I understand the depth of feeling around this issue and the depth of concern, and I'm engaged with long COVID groups both across the UK and indeed internationally. This resolution does not dismiss the significance of long COVID. In fact, it explicitly names it as one of the key challenges that the Scottish Government faces, and in fact that the world faces, because the consequential impact of COVID we've seen and the emergence of long COVID is something that we've been seeing for a long period of time. As sorry, I don't know the second speaker's name, I apologise. we've seen emerging as a response to viral infections for quite some time. I'm engaged in the ME and chronic fatigue syndrome, APPG, in Parliament with Carol Monaghan MP. This is something that is of interest to that group, because a lot of these diseases are caused by chronic inflammation and the consequences of chronic inflammation. Now, in COVID, because it's such a, it's called a cytokine storm, and that's an inflammatory storm in the body, and it depletes key elements of nutrition that the body is required to recover from. And I don't think that that is well enough understood, not just in long COVID, but also in ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. MS is another disease that is indicated to have consequential impact in this, but also heart and lung disease, where chronic inflammation is now recognised as a significant factor, influencing factor in how that disease manifests. So this resolution does not dismiss any of that. This resolution acknowledges that it's an important issue and something that has to be taken very seriously. And so I do not feel that there is a need to remit back. What I would say is that we're having our first conference. We can't have every single issue on the agenda or a resolution that accommodates every aspect of the challenges we face. But the seriousness of long COVID certainly would deserve further discussion either in committee or by a separate resolution back to conference at another time, because it is a very distinct and very serious consequence of the pandemic. So I would ask you to support the resolution as it stands, and I would hope that the movers of the remit back would accept my words and withdraw the remit back, and we would engage in the meaningful work. I know just put in a huge amount of work on an alternative resolution to conference. I had some great points in it, and I would be very happy to continue to work with her in developing that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil. Delegates will now move to a vote. This is a vote on motion number 15. First, all those in favour of the remit. Sir, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, but I'm chairing proceedings. Sir, could you kindly take your seat? No. Could you kindly take? Could you? Ladies and gentlemen, if you would. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, can we just move to a vote on we've just discussed a very important issue. If I can instruct the General Secretary, thank you very much indeed. We've discussed a very sensitive issue when people have suffered terribly by health, so I apologise to conference having to listen to that. Can we move to the vote first of all, please? Those in favour of the remit back, please raise their cards. Those against? The remit back falls. Those in favour of the motion as proposed? Those against? The motion is passed overwhelmingly. Thank you very much indeed, conference. Now, we have two more items on the agenda. We just have a few minutes before lunch. I'm going to hear sustainable food to be proposed by Andrew McKinnon. I'm going to ask for a seconder from the floor to allow it to be heard. Can I have a seconder? Thank you very much indeed. The motion that we haven't yet heard, conference, on protecting Scotland's battlefields, I want this to be heard. I'm going to ask that we're back for 1:30 p.m. sharp. It will be the first motion that we hear, and I'll hear from Will Mackay, who will propose, Jimmy Duncan, who will second, and Heather McLean, who will propose the amendment. Thank you very much indeed. If conference agrees. Thank you very much. Can I now call Andrew McKinnon to move sustainable food? Andrew, thank you very much for your patience. If I could ask those leaving to move as quietly as possible. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, conference. I'll be very brief with this. I just want to pay respect to Helen Smith, who can't be here today, who put a lot of work into this motion. And she's... Yeah. Helen's also standing for an ordinary member of the NEC, should anyone wish to vote for her. This motion here sets out a policy or a proposition, should I say, that Alba supports an industry of sustainable and local food production in Scotland. We've seen the consequences of COVID and how that's upset our supply chains. We've seen the same with this absolutely reckless Tory Brexit that's been foisted upon Scotland against our expressed will, and we need to enact policies and support policies that are going to shield us from this sort of disruption. There's a lot of benefit that can come from letting local people engage in this kind of activity. And the other part of this is about embracing technology. All too often we think about food as planting seeds in the ground and letting it grow, and that'll be that. But we need to get our heads around this new technology, like what the Netherlands are using, the hydroponics, aeroponics, aquaponics, vertical farming, etc. If they can do it, so can we. So I'm not going to go on at great length about that. I'd urge you all to vote for the motion. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew, and for your brevity. So, delegates, most sustainable food, we have a proposer and a seconder. Can I ask that the motion is passed by acclaim? Thank you very much. It's now time for a break. Those of you who'd like to attend the political information event, we have, where are we? Campaigning, no, we have party structure, fundraising and membership in the Lesser Hall, and we have the Alba business event, which is wrongly billed as 5:30. It's now at 12:30. Thank you very much indeed. I'll see you all back sharp at 1:30. Thank you very much for a very good session. Thanks.